Listen, if you think being socially magnetic in 2026 is about charisma, confidence, or just being yourself, that belief is already making you predictable, and predictable people don't attract attention. They get managed, ignored, or quietly used. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody tells you. The same psychological forces that make someone magnetic can also make them manipulative. The difference isn't the technique, it's the intent. And once you see how these forces work, you'll never look at conversations the same way again. You live in an era where attention is scarcer than clean water in a blackout. When attention becomes scarce, the brain reverts to survival rules. One of those rules is simple: we follow what feels emotionally efficient. That's why the first hack isn't talking better, it's regulating your emotional temperature. When you stay unusually calm in chaotic conversations, people unconsciously sync their nervous system to yours. This is basic neurobiology. Mirror neurons and vagal tone drive emotional contagion. The practical move is to slow your breathing and lower your voice when others speed up. You don't dominate the room, you become the anchor. People start orbiting you without knowing why. Now here's where it gets darker. The human brain trusts what feels familiar, not what's true. In survival psychology, familiarity equals safety. That's why repeating someone's emotional language, not their words but their feelings, creates instant rapport. If they say they're fine, but their tone says frustrated, you reflect the frustration gently. They feel seen before they feel judged. Used ethically, this builds trust. Used unethically, it lets you bypass critical thinking. The takeaway is simple: mirror emotion first, logic later, because the brain evolved to accept safety signals before facts. As systems collapse, socially, economically, digitally, people cling to meaning. That's why framing matters more than content. If you frame yourself as someone who notices patterns others miss, people assign you authority automatically. This taps into a survival heuristic called competence signaling. You don't need to prove intelligence, you imply it by calmly connecting dots out loud. A practical example, say, I've noticed when people argue about X, they're usually really afraid of Y. Suddenly you're not part of the argument, you're above it. People lean in. Here's a trick straight out of crisis negotiation: controlled vulnerability. When you reveal a small flaw strategically, it lowers defenses because the brain reads imperfection as authenticity. But timing is everything. Vulnerability before trust looks unstable. Vulnerability after rapport looks brave. The move is to admit a past mistake that's already resolved. You're not bleeding, you're showing scars. That signals survival. That signals leadership. Another force most people underestimate is silence. In high-stress survival environments, silence is information. In conversation, silence creates psychological pressure because the brain hates uncertainty. If you stop talking after making a strong point, the other person fills the gap, often revealing more than they intended. This isn't manipulation by force, it's manipulation by gravity. The practical takeaway: after asking a meaningful question, don't rescue the silence. Let it work. By 2026, social power will belong to people who manage energy, not opinions. That's why emotional pacing matters. If you escalate intensity slowly while others rush, you control the rhythm. This is straight from crowd control psychology and military de-escalation training. Fast emotions feel fake. Slow emotions feel dangerous, in a good way. You become unpredictable, and unpredictability commands attention. Finally, there's the darkest lever of all: selective validation. When approval is constant, it's meaningless. When it's rare but sincere, it becomes addictive. The brain releases more dopamine when rewards are unpredictable. That's why intermittent reinforcement works in survival training, gambling, and, yes, relationships. The ethical line is awareness. The practical move is to praise effort, not identity. You encourage growth without creating dependence. Here's the thing you need to understand. None of these are new. They're ancient survival adaptations dressed up for a modern world. Used consciously, they make you grounded, respected, and magnetic. Used unconsciously, they turn you into someone else's tool. The blackout isn't coming someday, it's already here. Social systems are overloaded. Attention is rationed. The ethical line is awareness. The practical move is to praise effort, not identity. You encourage growth without creating dependence. Here's the thing you need to understand. None of these are new. They're ancient survival adaptations dressed up for a modern world. Used consciously, they make you grounded, respected, and magnetic. Used unconsciously, they turn you into someone else's tool. The blackout isn't coming someday. It's already here. Social systems are overloaded. Attention is rationed. And the people who understand human psychology at a survival level will shape the future conversations, alliances, and power structures. So the real question isn't whether these hacks work. They do. The real question is whether you'll use them to build trust or quietly control it. Because once you understand these mechanics, you start noticing something unsettling everywhere you go. You'll see how certain people walk into a room and the emotional weather changes. Not because they're loud, not because they're attractive, but because they control contrast. In survival psychology, contrast is how the brain detects threat and opportunity. If everyone is reactive, the calm person feels powerful. If everyone is calm, the intense person feels important. The practical move is simple but dangerous. Never match the dominant energy in the room. Counterbalance it. You become the reference point, and reference points become leaders during uncertainty. Here's another layer most people miss. The human brain evolved to follow those who help it conserve calories, mental calories included. That's why people feel drawn to those who simplify chaos. When you take a messy emotional situation and summarize it clearly, you reduce cognitive load. The brain rewards that with trust. This principle is straight out of military briefing doctrine. Clarity under pressure signals command fitness. In daily life, it sounds like, so what's really happening is this. When you do that, people stop arguing and start listening. But there's a shadow side. Once people associate relief with your presence, absence becomes leverage. This is where magnetism can slide into manipulation. The takeaway isn't to withdraw affection, it's to stay consistent. In long-term survival dynamics, consistency beats intensity. Intense allies burn out. Reliable ones endure. Let's talk about micro-threats, because the brain is obsessed with them. In uncertain environments, humans constantly scan for dominance cues, posture, eye contact, vocal pauses. You don't need aggression, you need non-reactivity. When someone challenges you verbally and you respond slower, not defensively, their brain recalculates your status upward. This is rooted in primate hierarchy biology. The practical example: don't rush to correct disrespect. Let it hang, then respond calmly. You signal that you're not operating at the same urgency level. Now here's a survival truth that feels counterintuitive. People trust those who can walk away. In field psychology, this is known as option independence. When someone senses you don't need the outcome, they assume you have resources. Resources equal survival fitness. In conversation, this means you don't over-explain, over-pitch, or over-pursue. You offer, then pause. If they lean in, you continue. If they don't, you don't chase. That restraint is magnetic because it implies abundance. And then there's the final principle, the one nobody likes admitting exists. Fear and hope are processed in neighboring brain regions. The best communicators don't choose one, they blend both. Too much fear creates paralysis. Too much hope creates delusion. But controlled tension? That creates movement. Survival instructors do this constantly. They make the risk real, then show the path through it. Socially, you do the same. You acknowledge the stakes, then offer clarity. People follow those who help them move forward without lying about the danger. By now, you should feel it. That slight discomfort. Because these aren't tips. They're operating principles. They work whether you're ethical or not. And that's why understanding them matters. In a collapsing attention economy, ignorance doesn't make you innocent. It makes you vulnerable. The people who will thrive in 2026 won't be the loudest, the nicest, or the most confident. They'll be the ones who understand human behavior at a survival level and choose consciously how to use that power. Another overlooked weapon is narrative positioning. Humans think in stories, not facts. In crisis environments, whoever defines the story defines the behavior. If you position events as learning moments instead of failures, people follow you through losses. This is standard in elite survival training. Reframing pain keeps morale intact. Socially, it sounds like, "This didn't work, but here's what it showed us." You become the person who turns damage into direction. As pressure increases, people regress emotionally. That's biology, not weakness. The neocortex hands control back to older brain systems. This is when emotionally literate individuals gain disproportionate influence. If you can name what someone is feeling before they do, you give their nervous system relief. That relief gets misattributed to you as competence or care. The ethical takeaway: never use this on someone who hasn't consented emotionally. The practical takeaway: ask better questions than others dare to ask.